We are very excited and honored to have with us this morning Jack Jezreel. Jack holds a Master of Divinity degree from the University of Notre Dame and spent 6 years in a Catholic worker community before turning his attention to transformative education, focused on how to inspire and encourage people of faith to recognize the critical relationship between compassion and authentic religious expression. He is the original author of JustFaith and now serves as executive director of JustFaith Ministries. JustFaith Ministries is partnered with Catholic Relief Services, the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the Maryknoll Fathers and Brothers, Pax Christi USA, and Bread for the World. Here to speak this morning on Gathered and Sent, Saints, Prophets, and Martyrs on a Mission, please join me in welcoming to Congress Jack Jezreel.
Archbishop Gomez, my brothers and sisters in Christ, good morning. Even though we just prayed, the Apostle Paul tells us to pray always, so let's give it a try. And remember, loud is good. And this will be familiar. The Lord be with you. Lift up your hearts. Let us give thanks and praise to the Lord our God. And let's freelance a bit. Consider this response. We are. If I were to ask who are called to be the people of God, you would say, who are called in faith to follow Jesus the Christ, who are called in faith to be a light to the nations, who are called to feed the hungry, who are committed to visiting the prisoner, who are willing to clothe the naked, who are on fire to bring a great healing love to all creation, who are determined to bring hope to a suffering world. And then let the church say, amen. Well, since I'm supposed to give a talk and not lead a revival, let me preface my remarks this morning with a couple of cautions. But first, since this is being televised, and I'll never get to do this again in my life, hi, Dad. My brothers and sisters, for most of my adult life, I've worked in an area that we Catholics sometimes call social ministry. That is, the church's great tradition of caring for the abandoned, the wounded, and those enslaved by the structures of injustice. Throughout the church's history, this is the work that most characterizes the lives of saints, martyrs, and prophets. And those of us inspired by saints, martyrs, and prophets who work in social ministry often say that our work is to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. So given those two options, you can probably guess which one I'm going to do this morning. I figured you would prefer to be provoked rather than anesthetized. So this is just to say that my intent this morning is to nudge and challenge and provoke a bit, not for the purposes of being a pest, but to agitate enough to help us think new and fresh thoughts, even as they might make us uncomfortable. It's my own experience that I grow spiritually, morally, and even intellectually, mostly by being made uncomfortable. I consider being made uncomfortable an attribute of the Holy Spirit. And I so often notice that the transformation process begins with being provoked, disturbed, or annoyed, which is why people who have children are so often transformed. So if I say something this morning that seems difficult to you, that could be a good thing. Anyway, I'm asking your permission to say some challenging things. I also admit that I'm not a professional theologian. If anything, I'm a practical theologian. That is to say, I don't have a PhD in ethics, but I work in one of the largest faith formation laboratories in the country called JustFaith Ministries, experimenting, exploring, and inviting people into the relationship between the practice of their faith and the practice of compassion. And most of what I have to say this morning, I've come by simply by trying to keep my eyes and my ears open. Third, and finally, my remarks this morning are meant to be exploratory, interrogative, and generative. As my grad school theology professor once remarked, theology has suffered more from being boring than it has from being wrong. My intent, though, is neither to be boring nor wrong, but I do not presume to speak without error. My daughters, in fact, are absolutely confident that I will speak with error. So you should test my words and critique freely. And this morning I want to prompt as many questions as I want to answer, even if it takes hyperbole, which I have never used once in my life, not even once. Nothing I'm going to say this morning is new. Everything I'm going to say is quintessentially Catholic, but I will warn you, what I'm proposing this morning will speak to the most dramatic reconfiguration of the Catholic parish that I can imagine. My wife assures me, Jack, you may be wrong, but you sure are loud. So just to make sure that we're all awake, let me say something as provocative as I can right away. And I will risk sounding crabby, which is not my dominant mojo. Here goes. If it can be said that Catholic social teaching is still a best-kept secret in the church, that in effect most people in most parishes are only vaguely familiar with the tradition of compassion for the poor and the vulnerable, charity and justice, written, spoken, or lived, then it can be also said that every facet of Catholic life in most parishes is being shortchanged. The fact is that the vision of God's justice and Jesus' proclamation of the reign of God and the life journey of compassion and integrity outlined in Catholic social teaching and the Gospels are absolutely central, critical ingredients of our mission, our purpose, and our vision. To put it succinctly, how can we possibly follow Jesus and not find ourselves in the company of our sisters and brothers who are hungry, homeless, hopeless, slaves, lepers, and prostitutes? In my opinion, to the extent that people of faith are not interested in justice and not engaged in compassion for the poor and the vulnerable is the extent to which the U.S. Catholic parish has yet to become what God has so eagerly invited us all to. And this only reveals, and I'm going to sound really crabby, and this only reveals how the ministries therein, including religious education, have failed it, maybe even distracted it. So, is that provocative enough? If our churches are not forming, are not trying to form real-life saints, real-life prophets, and real-life martyrs, then what are we doing? Now, lest I sound too crabby, the truth is, I am very, very hopeful. In fact, I'm even encouraged by the possibilities in front of us. This conference itself, 40,000 strong with all kinds of emphasis on the church's mission, speaks to the tremendous progress made in the short 40-something years since Vatican II, which in church dog years is like 12 minutes. My thesis this morning has 3 parts. First, It's my observation that while parish-based social ministry, and again by this I mean the local church's commitment to the needs of the poor and the vulnerable and the suffering, while social ministry is growing and maturing and even thriving in some places, it is still mostly underdeveloped, inadequately supported, and not an integral part of parish life in most places. So on one hand, there is evidence of real change, things that we would not have seen just a couple of decades ago, but the problem is it's happening in a relatively very small number of places. Number two, and perhaps you'll find this surprising, it's my conviction that the major challenge ahead of us is not a lack of theological investment on the part of our tradition or church leadership, or a lack of goodwill in the pews, or fallout from the pedophilia scandal, for example. Rather, the impediment is a structural one, found in the home of most Catholics, that is, how the parish defines itself. My conviction is that bishops and pastors are as handicapped by this structure as those who work directly in social ministry. And the hopeful part is that this structure can be changed within the most fundamental logic of what it means to be Catholic and prophetic and saintly and faithful. And third, that for the American Catholic parish to thrive in the future, the parish structure must be changed and will require nothing less, but nothing more, than the embrace of our own best examples of faith communities throughout history, requiring both a new vocabulary and a new paradigm for parish membership. This will necessarily and dramatically impact the definition of what it means to be a minister in the parish. If you work in a parish or diocese and you're here this morning, I hope you came willing to change your job description. So back to my first point. The role of what we call social ministry within the life of a parish can be evaluated in a number of ways, I suppose, but ultimately it depends upon our assumptions and our expectations. If, on one hand, we think of parish social ministry as little more than one of the extras that pastors or staff or parishes in general can choose from as a kind of optional side dish to the real meal of parish life, then we might be tempted to admire parish social ministry where it happens and then just shrug our shoulders when it doesn't. If, on the other hand, the assumption is that a commitment to the poor and vulnerable is a constitutive, that is, a necessary part of biblical Christian Catholic faith, then it should be assumed that parish life in every parish ought to reflect that. And it might be deduced that the way this commitment to social mission would be reflected would include measurable evidence like staffing priorities, particular kinds of parish projects, the language of its prayers, homily attention, bulletin space, the pastors' and deacons' calendars, and budgeting, just to name a few.